Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel at Plot Designs, where I like to build furniture and do decorating tutorials. If that's something you're interested in, make sure you click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Today's project, we are working on a craft center for my neighbor. So we are going to start by cutting down our sheets of plywood. I am using 3/4 inch birch plywood, and let's get started. Alright, so this is kind of a rough drawing of the design that I am doing. It's a little sketch. This is on one side of my wall, and it's going to wrap around the corner onto the other side of the wall. And right now we are going to focus on building this cubby system at the top of the wall. And so that's what we're going to start with. We started by cutting down our sheets into the back panel and then the top and bottom panels. I then took the back panel and I put pocket holes all along the back side and used my handheld router to route the slots where the dividers would go for the cubby system. I then attached the back panel to the bottom and the top panel. I like to do this without using glue first to make sure everything's going to fit well before I go back and put glue on the joints. Once I had this put together, I went ahead and I cut the leftover plywood pieces to create the ends of my cubby. After I had those end pieces attached, I went ahead and took some more of the plywood and cut them down to create basically another box that would attach to the end. As I said before, this is a cubby system that was going to wrap around and it would end up on 2 walls. And so I attached those as well with pocket holes. I didn't get a great video of the next part, but the next piece was to do the dividers, and I cut those pieces to the right size and I put an edge banding on them with my iron and then sanded that smooth. Then I ripped down some select pine to about 1.5 inches wide, and I used that to put a face frame around the top and bottom and sides of the cubby system to finish it off. Now that the cubby system is built, I decided to move on to the base cabinet that was going to act as part of the legs to hold up the desk part of the craft center. I basically put this cabinet together in the same way that I built the cubby system. I cut all of my pieces and routed where the shelf would go. The only difference was, instead of using pocket holes, this time I chose to use screws and screw from the outside of the panel. I countersunk the screws so that I could go back and I could fill those holes with plugs and then sand them smooth for a cleaner finish. I chose to do this just because these holes are a little bit easier to fill than pocket holes. With everything glued and screwed in place, I applied the edge banding to the shelf, and then again with that same ripped piece of select pine, I went ahead and framed the outside of the cabinet. And here you can see my process for filling in the screw holes. I just take plugs and fill them in with glue, and then I take my oscillating tool and I cut the ends off, and then I go back and sand that down. At this point, I took some of the leftover plywood and I cut them into strips and started building the frame in which the desktop would sit upon. This frame I am going to screw into the studs of the wall, and you're not going to see it in the video, but I did end up doing a lot of reinforcements in the corners to make sure that everything was stable and sturdy. So here's the view of the other wall that the center is going to wrap around. The circled part on the top is the additional piece that I added onto the cubby system. And now all I have left is some additional shelving that will go below that. You'll notice that, again, I use the same process as the other pieces to put this piece together. You'll also see a little bit better detail in how I apply the edge banding. And here's just a quick dry fit before I continue on. Because of the narrow spacing of the shelves, I decided to go ahead and paint before attaching the shelves, and I did that with the Sherwin-Williams paint. With everything painted and dry, it is time to take everything over to the neighbor's house. This is the room that everything will be going into. We decided to bring in that base cabinet and start attaching the frame to the wall. We did that by using a level and finding the studs with a stud finder, and then bolting the frame into those studs. Then we used those measurements to finally finish the last piece of the puzzle, which was the desktop. We used another sheet of plywood and we used a circular saw, making sure to tape it down so that we wouldn't have any tear out, and we cut them down to the right length. I applied edge banding to where it was necessary and gave everything a good sand before applying several coats of a sealer on top of the counters. While the tabletop dried, I went ahead and painted the two table legs that I bought from Home Depot that I would use for extra support for the base of the desk. After bringing the tabletop in, it fit really nicely, and I went ahead and started screwing it to the base of the desk. After some patience and some clever maneuvering, we were able to put the other pieces together, and again we screwed everything into studs to make sure everything was nice and sturdy using some very good bolts. And then we took a 1x4 regular pine boards, ripped them down to an appropriate size, and trimmed the top of the cubby around the top to give it a nice finished look. Now all that's left is to go around and caulk all of the seams and the edges, and then finally finish painting that trim that I put up. It was a big project, and I'm super glad that I had the opportunity to do this for my neighbor. She ended up loving it, and it was definitely a learning process for me. It is one of the bigger projects that I've done, but hopefully you were able to learn a few things, and I definitely did. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll show you my future projects.